There are two types of pain in a woman's life. The first is the pain of not being loved. The second is the pain of realizing you've spent your entire life begging for a kind of love that ultimately only made you smaller. I know this because I've lived through both. There was no dramatic awakening moment. Instead, it eroded slowly, through thousands of swallowed words, through decisions that placed others' opinions above my own intuition, through the way I gradually learned that existing was something to apologize for. At some point, I realized I had become an expert at guessing what others wanted from me, but was completely blind to what I actually wanted. Jung once wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." He understood that when we change from within, the way the world responds to us changes accordingly. Not magic, the science of human existence. I want to share 7 transformations I've witnessed not only in myself but in hundreds of other women. Because ultimately, in a world full of copies, nothing is more attractive than a woman brave enough to become the only original of herself. From needing to be loved to being worthy of love every night I check my phone before bed. Not to see the time. There are moments we feel like a bottomless hungry stomach, that thirst for someone's attention, care, love. And in those moments, we become the worst version of ourselves. From childhood, our brains learn a simple equation: good equals loved, bad equals ignored. Gradually, we connect love with performance, with having to be good enough to be worthy. That's where everything starts going wrong. When we need to be loved, we operate from a place of deficit. This isn't just a psychological feeling. It creates an actual energy field, like an invisible black hole sucking the air out of everything around it. People sense this at a subconscious level. And they run. I remember the years living in that state. Every date felt like a job interview. Every unanswered text within an hour made me conjure 17 scenarios about why they didn't like me anymore. I wasn't loving, I was investing. Investing time, effort, emotion with hopes of receiving emotional returns. When I didn't get enough interest, I felt cheated. The scariest part? It turns us into unconscious manipulators. We do good things not because we want to do good, but because we want to be praised. We care for others not out of love, but because we want to be cared for in return. We become actors in our own lives. And here's the cruel paradox: the more we need to be loved, the harder we become to love. Because real love can only exist between real people, not between masks. Tuesday, 3 a.m., 2019, I sat on the bathroom floor crying. Not for any dramatic reason. Just because of a seen message that wasn't replied to. That's when I understood I needed to change. Not change to be loved by someone, but change so I no longer needed that love like a painkiller. Jung called this connecting with the self, not the small ego that constantly demands, but the larger self that contains everything. This self lacks nothing. It simply exists. From that full existence, love naturally radiates. The difference is immediately visible. A woman who needs to be loved lives in the future, planning the next meeting, imagining desired outcomes. She analyzes every text like a detective looking for clues. A woman who is worthy of love? She puts her phone aside and enjoys the present moment. Not because she's playing hard to get, but because she's genuinely satisfied with her life, with or without that person. This change doesn't come from changing behavior. You can't fake being worthy of love. The change must come from within, from a deep understanding of your own intrinsic value. And I'm not talking about achievements or beauty. I'm talking about the value that cannot be taken away, the value of your very existence. When you understand this, you will never beg for love. Not out of arrogance, but because you understand that real love cannot be begged for. And something magical happens: the less you need love, the more you receive. When you become a full bowl instead of a hungry stomach, you attract people who are equally full. But when you start living from this fullness, a new challenge emerges. Because to maintain that confidence, you must face the deepest fear, the fear of not being perfect. And that's when the second transformation becomes necessary. From perfect to authentic, I once had 47 selfies of the same angle. And still didn't post any of them. We live in an era of edited photos, Google rehearsed answers. Everything must be perfect, according to someone's standards that we don't even know who they are. In this race toward non-existent perfection, we've lost the most precious thing, ourselves. Perfect is actually quite boring. It's like hotel paintings, beautiful in a safe way, no one complains, but no one remembers either. You might admire it for a few seconds, then forget completely when you step out of the elevator. I used to be a perfection expert. Always had answers to every question, even when I didn't know. Always had the right mask for every occasion, confidence mask for work, cute mask for dating, deep mask for serious conversations. Then I burned out. Not just physical fatigue. Soul exhaustion. Because maintaining perfection requires a tremendous amount of energy, like a light that's never allowed to turn off. But worse than exhaustion was the deep loneliness. When you always wear a mask, no one can see your real face. When you're always fine, no one feels safe to not be fine around you. Jung understood this when he distinguished between persona and shadow. We need persona to function in society, that's not the problem. The problem is when persona becomes all we allow the world to see. The moment I understood this, late March, in a meeting with 12 people, I was presenting a project I'd worked on for 4 months. In the middle of slide 7, I realized I had miscalculated a basic number. The entire conclusion was wrong. The old version of me would have tried to cover up, deflect, or blame problematic data. Instead, I stopped mid-sentence, sorry. I just discovered I calculated this number wrong from the beginning. Give me 2 minutes to double check. Silence. I prepared for disappointed looks, for sighs. Instead, I saw relieved smiles. Thank you for the honesty, my boss said. This shows you truly care about quality. That was the first time I understood, perfection doesn't create respect. Authenticity creates respect. But authenticity doesn't mean exposing every flaw. Not telling every sad story or complaining constantly. Authenticity means not being afraid to be yourself, with all the contradictions, imperfections, and internal struggles. Something magical happens, when you stop trying to be perfect, you allow others to stop performing too. You become a safe space where people can remove their masks. An authentic woman understands, flaws aren't things to hide, they're doors for others to enter. When you admit I don't know either, others feel permitted not to know. When you show you struggle too, others feel allowed to struggle. That's why perfect people are often lonely, while authentic people are often loved. Not because they don't have flaws, but because they're brave enough to live with those flaws naturally. But when you start living authentically, something surprising happens, life will throw challenges at you that you cannot control. And that's when you realize authenticity is just the beginning. Now you need to learn how to respond to the unpredictable, not as a victim, but as a creator. From reacting to creating. They fired me on Friday. I spent the whole weekend writing a justification email. Never sent it. Life has two ways of living, as a victim of circumstances, or as the author of your own story. How you choose determines not only what happens, but who you become. For years, I lived in full-time reaction mode. Everything was someone else's fault. The boss didn't understand my vision. The boyfriend wasn't caring enough. Family was too pressuring. Society was unfair. I had a perfect collection of reasons why life wasn't going as desired. And all of them were beyond my control. That was the trap. Victim mentality doesn't just make you suffer, it strips away your power. When everything is someone else's fault, you can't change anything. You can only sit there waiting for the world to change. But the world doesn't change. While you wait, life continues flowing. Jung had a quote I had to read 20 times to understand: "I am not what happened to me, I am what I choose to become." At first I thought this was just empty motivation. Now I understand it's one of the deepest insights about human nature. The difference isn't in circumstances, but in how we respond. The reactive person asks, "Why is this happening to me?" The creative person asks, "What can I create from this?" Same circumstances, completely different outcomes. The day I was fired, I had prepared a perfect revenge script. Write bad company reviews. Contact old clients to tell the truth. Tell anyone who would listen about this injustice. In the midst of anger, there was a moment of clarity. I was spending 100% of my energy looking backward, while the future was opening up ahead. What if this is an opportunity instead of a disaster? That question changed everything. Instead of proving they were wrong to fire me, I focused on proving to myself that I could create something better. Instead of trying to go back, I explored what I really wanted to do. Jung called this active imagination, not wishful dreaming, but actively participating in creating reality instead of passively enduring it. Women operating from creative psychology have clear characteristics. They don't waste time explaining why life is difficult. They spend time finding ways to make it better. Important, I'm not talking about denying emotions. Anger, sadness, disappointment, all are natural and necessary. The creative woman allows herself to feel fully, crying when she needs to cry, getting angry when she needs to be angry. But afterward, she asks, "Now what? What can I learn? What can I create?" Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, called the space between stimulus and response man's last freedom. In that space, you can choose. Creative women have expanded this space. Instead of instant reflexes, she asks, "What response would help me grow the most?" The result? When you stop being a victim of circumstances, you start attracting better circumstances. Not magic, but because you've changed how you see and act. You look for opportunities instead of problems. Focus on solutions instead of complaints. People are naturally attracted to this energy, the energy of someone who can turn pain into wisdom, failure into lessons, difficulties into opportunities. Because everyone wants to be around people who see possibilities where others see only problems. But to truly live from this creative energy, to not be pulled back into the old reactive patterns, you need something most of us lost long ago, your own inner voice. And to find that voice again, you must stop asking permission from others to exist. From asking permission to self-determination. I once asked 7 people's opinions before cutting my hair. How many times a day do you ask yourself what will people think, before doing something? How many decisions don't you dare make because you're afraid of not being approved? I lived like a phone that always needed Wi-Fi to function. That Wi-Fi was other people's approval. Without it, I felt disconnected from myself. For a long time, I didn't know what colors I liked because I always chose according to trends. Didn't know what I wanted to eat because I always asked, "What do you guys want to eat?" Didn't know my opinions on important issues because I always adjusted to the crowd. One day, I realized I had become a stranger to myself. The awakening moment, an argument with friends about a social issue. I had a completely different opinion, but as usual, stayed silent to keep the peace. Going home, I felt an indescribable frustration. Not because their opinion was wrong, but because I had betrayed myself. When did I start believing my opinion was less valuable than others? Jung called the process of escaping this condition individuation, becoming an independent individual, conscious of yourself and not drowned in the collective unconscious. Women with real magnetism have learned to listen to the inner voice, not the voice of the small ego demanding attention, but the voice of deep wisdom that knows what's right for their life. The first time I said no, an invitation to a party that I would have automatically agreed to just to please. This time, instead of making up excuses, I said directly, "Thank you for the invitation, but I won't be attending." Silence on the other end. I prepared for a storm of questions, objections, maybe even anger. "Okay, maybe next time." That was it. That's when I understood, 90% of the drama I imagined would happen when I told the truth, only existed in my head. Self-determination isn't arrogance. It means you've developed an inner compass, an internal guidance system that navigates life without needing to depend on others' positioning. This compass is calibrated by core values, by what you truly consider important, by your vision of who you want to become. It's not perfect, sometimes it's wrong too. But at least it's yours. There's a big difference between selfish and self-care. Selfish is only caring about yourself while disregarding others. Self-care is understanding that if you don't take care of yourself, you'll have nothing to give others. Self-determined women understand this. She doesn't say yes to every request because she knows insincere yes creates negative energy for both parties. Self-determination is a journey, not a destination. Every day has hundreds of small opportunities to choose between pleasing others and being honest with yourself. Sometimes you'll choose wrong. Sometimes you'll fall back into old behavioral patterns. But each time you choose to listen to the inner voice instead of outside noise, you strengthen the muscle of self-determination. The miracle, when you stop asking permission to exist, you start truly living. When you stop trying to please everyone, you become more attractive to people who truly matter. Because authenticity cannot be faked. And it has an irreplaceable magnetism. But when you start living according to your inner voice, a great temptation appears, comparing your path with others' paths. And that's when you need another important transformation, from competing with others to becoming the only person no one can replace. From comparison to uniqueness. Instagram, 2,000 followers. Self-esteem, 0. We live in an era of never-ending comparison contests. Comparing lives, jobs, relationships, even breakfast. In this endless race, we forget we're running on someone else's track. I used to be a professional athlete in the sport of comparison. Looking at a social media photo, in 0.5 seconds, my brain had calculated whether I won or lost to that person in at least 5 areas: appearance, success, happiness, likes, background in the photo. The result was always the same, either hollow pride or useless self-pity. Never peace. The scariest thing about comparison, it doesn't just make you feel bad, it kills uniqueness. When you're always looking at others, you can't look within yourself. When you're always trying to keep up, you can't find your own path. Jung wrote about personal myth, the unique story that only you can tell. But how can you tell your story when you're busy living someone else's script? The moment I understood, scrolling Facebook, saw a girl my age who had just been promoted to CEO of a startup. Instead of congratulations, my first reaction, why aren't I CEO yet? Then I stopped. Asked myself, do I actually want to be a CEO? The answer, no. I like writing, like creating, like working with ideas more than managing people. But because society considers CEO more successful than writer, I automatically felt inferior. That's when I realized, I was living by someone else's success metrics. Jung talks about individuation, not just separating from the crowd but finding what makes only you. The unique talents, unique perspective, unique way of understanding the world that only you have. To find this, you must stop looking outward and start looking inward. I started with digital detox, not temporarily, changing how I used social media. Instead of mindless scrolling, asking before opening apps, what am I looking for? Instead of following accounts that made me feel lacking, following people who inspired positively. More importantly, spending time exploring myself. Nothing to compare, no benchmarks. Just pure exploration. What do I like? What am I good at? What do I care about? What do I want to contribute to the world? Questions that sound simple but are terrifyingly difficult to answer when you're used to defining yourself through others' lens. I discovered I have a special way of seeing the world, seeing patterns where others see chaos, seeing connections where others see separation. The ability to translate complex ideas into simple language. A special kind of empathy for people who feel different. These things aren't skills you learn or achievements you earn. They're simply me. When I started honoring and developing these natural talents instead of trying to become someone else, life changed completely. Women with special magnetism understand, she doesn't need to be the best in any comparison. She just needs to be herself, completely, authentically, without copying. I'm not talking about stopping learning. I'm talking about learning from others to become a better version of yourself, not to become a copy of them. When you stop trying to be like someone, you naturally become memorable. In a world full of variations of the same theme, uniqueness becomes a superpower. People don't remember you because you're like someone famous. They remember you because you're the most authentic version of yourself. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." To become who you truly are, you must stop trying to become who others are. The unique woman doesn't ask, "Am I better than her?" She asks, "Am I living honestly as my true self?" From that authenticity, a special kind of magnetism radiates, the kind no one can copy. But there's something I didn't expect. When you start embracing uniqueness, life will challenge you in unpredictable ways. And to truly shine in that uniqueness, you need to learn the hardest lesson, the art of letting go. From control to acceptance, I had 17 Excel spreadsheets to manage my life. Anxiety level, also 17. I used to believe that if I planned enough, worried enough, and tried hard enough, I could control the outcome of every situation. Had spreadsheets for everything, backup plans for backup plans, and chronic worry about what could go wrong. Then I completely burned out. Trying to control everything is like trying to control the weather by worrying about it. Useless and self-torturing. It took years and several major shocks for me to understand a basic truth: 90% of what we worry about never happens. The things that actually happen are usually things we never thought of. Jung had profound insight about this. He talked about surrender to the self, not surrender in defeat, but entrusting to a wisdom larger than the small ego. This is one of the deepest paradoxes. When we let go of the need to control, we paradoxically gain more control. The moment I truly understood, in the middle of the biggest project in my career, worked 6 months, planned every detail to the minute, predicted every potential problem, prepared for every imaginable scenario. Then COVID happened. Overnight, all plans became meaningless. Offices closed, teams scattered, clients panicked, timelines constantly changed. Everything I had carefully controlled was suddenly beyond reach. Initially, panic. Tried to control more, plan more, worry more intensely. But reality was, nothing was in my hands anymore. Adapt or collapse. I chose to adapt. In the process of adapting, I discovered a type of strength I didn't know I had, not the strength of control, the strength of adaptation. Not the power to dominate, but the grace to flow along. Instead of fighting changes, I started dancing with them. Instead of trying to stick to the original plan, I explored the possibilities these changes opened up. Instead of seeing chaos, I saw opportunity. That project ultimately succeeded more than anything I could have planned. Not because I controlled well, because I responded well. That's when I understood the difference between control and influence. Control is an illusion. We can't control outcomes, can't control other people, can't control circumstances. But we always have influence over how we respond, our choices, our attitudes. Truly strong women understand this distinction. She doesn't waste energy trying to control her husband's thoughts, children's choices, or boss's decisions. Instead, she focuses energy on what's truly within her influence, how she shows up, responds, interprets situations. I learned this through relationships too. Used to try to control how people saw me, responded to me, felt about me. Carefully orchestrated every interaction, analyzed every response, strategized next steps. Then burned out. Relationships became chess games instead of human connections. Started experimenting with letting go. Instead of trying to control the impression I made, focused on truly being present. Instead of trying to control conversations, let them flow naturally. Instead of trying to control outcomes, trusted the process. The result? Relationships became deeper, more authentic, more satisfying. People started feeling more comfortable around me because they sensed I wasn't trying to manipulate or control them. Acceptance doesn't mean having no preferences or goals. It means holding those preferences and goals lightly. You work toward them, but don't tie your happiness to achieving them exactly as imagined. I think about the women I admire most, they all have this quality. Strong vision for life, but also flexibility when life brings unexpected turns. They plan, but aren't devastated when plans change. There's a serenity about these women, a very attractive piece. They're not constantly fighting against reality or trying to force outcomes. They're dancing with life instead of wrestling with it. Jung talks about enantiodromia, the principle that everything eventually turns into its opposite. The more you try to control, the more out of control you feel. The more you try to force outcomes, the more frustrated you become. When you learn to let go, you paradoxically discover another kind of strength. Not the power to dominate, inner power. Not the strength to control external circumstances, but the strength to maintain focus regardless of what's happening around you. Women who understand this have magnetic quality because people sense her inner stability. In a chaotic and uncertain world, everyone wants to be around someone who can stay calm in the storm. Not because she can control the storm, because she's learned to dance in the rain. But to truly live in this state of acceptance, to not be pulled back into the old patterns of control by deep fears, you need to make the final and perhaps most important transformation, the transformation from fear to love. From fear to love, the final and perhaps deepest transformation, from a life driven by fear to a life guided by love. It took me years to realize that most of my decisions, most of my actions, most of my reactions stemmed from fear. Fear of not being good enough. Fear of being judged. Fear of abandonment. Fear of failure. Fear of success. Fear of being seen. Fear of being ignored. Fear had become my default operating system, and I wasn't even aware of it. Jung understood this profoundly. He wrote about how fear contracts us, makes us smaller, while love expands us, makes us larger. Fear focuses on what we might lose, love focuses on what we can create. Fear asks what if something bad happens, love asks what if something beautiful emerges. I remember the exact moment I realized fear was governing my life. I was offered an opportunity, a speaking engagement at a major conference. My first reaction wasn't excitement about the opportunity, it was terror about all the ways I could mess up. What if I forget what to say? What if people think I'm boring? What if I embarrass myself? What if they discover I'm a fraud? All these thoughts came from fear. Nothing based on reality, just projected fears about potential negative outcomes. Then I stopped and asked myself, what would I do if I approached this from love instead of fear? From love, the questions became, how can I serve this audience? What insights might help them? What can I share that's valuable? Same opportunity, completely different energy. Fear-based thinking is always about protection, protecting the ego, protecting image, protecting status quo. Love-based thinking is always about contribution, what can I give, How can I serve? How can I make a difference? When operating from fear, you make decisions to avoid negative outcomes. When operating from love, you make decisions to create positive outcomes. I've observed that women who operate primarily from love have a completely different presence. There's an openness about them, a warmth, a sense of safety that makes people want to be near. They're not defending against life, they're embracing it. I'm not saying they don't feel fear. They do. But they don't let fear make their decisions. They feel the fear, acknowledge it, thank it for trying to protect them, and then ask, what would love do in this situation? Jung wrote about love as the ultimate healing force. When we approach life from love, love of self, love of others, love of growth, love of contribution, we become a healing presence in the world. I learned this most painfully through a breakup. The initial instinct was to react from fear, blame, anger, self-protection, build walls, prove he was wrong. I spent months in this energy, and it was exhausting and destructive. Then something shifted. Instead of asking why did he hurt me, I started asking what can I learn from this? How can I grow? How can I become a better version of myself? Instead of focusing on his flaws, I focused on my own patterns and what I wanted to create differently. The transformation wasn't instant or easy. Gradually, anger became understanding. Pain became wisdom. Resentment became gratitude, gratitude for the lessons learned, for the clarity gained, for the person I was becoming. When I saw him months later, instead of bitterness or awkwardness, there was genuine warmth. I could see him as a human being who had tried his best with whatever emotional tools he had at the time. I could appreciate the good moments we'd shared without needing to demonize him because the relationship ended. That's the power of a love-based approach. It doesn't make you weak or naive. It makes you strong enough to transform pain into wisdom, conflict into understanding, endings into new beginnings. Viktor Frankl wrote, "Where love rules, there is no will to power, and where power predominates, love is lacking." Women who have made the transformation from fear to love understand this. They don't need to control or dominate because they're not operating from scarcity. They can be generous, open, trusting because they know their source of strength comes from within. This reflects in how they move through the world. They don't need to prove themselves because they're not afraid of being discovered as not good enough. They don't need to put others down because they're not competing. They don't need to protect their image because they're comfortable with who they are. People are naturally drawn to this energy. Everyone has enough fear in their own lives, they crave the presence of someone operating from somewhere else. Someone who can see possibility where others see problems. Who offers encouragement where others offer criticism. Who radiates warmth where others radiate anxiety. But most importantly, love-based women create ripple effects. Their way of being gives others permission to also operate from love. Their courage to be vulnerable makes others feel safe to be vulnerable. Their willingness to trust makes others want to become trustworthy. Jung believed in what he called mystical participation, the idea that we're all connected at a deeper level, and changes in one person affect the collective. When you shift from fear to love, you're not just transforming your own life, you're contributing to transforming the world around you. The woman operating from love asks, what would serve the highest good of myself and everyone involved? Instead of how do I avoid getting hurt, she asks how do I love fully? Instead of what could go wrong, she asks what could go beautifully right. When things do go wrong, because they will, because that's life, she doesn't retreat into fear. She asks how can I love my way through this? What would love do right now? That's the ultimate transformation, becoming a woman whose default response to life is love. Not naive love that ignores reality, fierce love that faces reality and chooses to respond with an open heart anyway. Sarah sits next to me in the coffee shop, not checking her phone once during our 2-hour conversation. After years of struggling, learning, falling down and getting back up, I finally understand that these transformations aren't separate events. They're like threads woven together, each supporting and reinforcing the others in a complex tapestry of becoming. When you shift from needing to be loved to being worthy of love, you naturally become more authentic because you don't need to perform for approval. This authenticity creates the foundation for you to become creative instead of just reactive, because you are no longer afraid of making mistakes or being imperfect. When you live creatively, you naturally develop self-determination because you're writing your own story instead of living someone else's script. This self-determination leads to embracing uniqueness, because you no longer need to compare yourself to others to find value. Uniqueness helps you accept life as it is, instead of trying to control everything to fit a mold. And finally, all of this leads to the ability to live from love instead of fear, because you no longer have anything to lose, nothing to prove, nothing to hide. Jung called this wholeness, not perfection, but integration of all your parts. The fearful and brave parts. The wise and foolish parts. The strong and vulnerable parts. The light and dark parts. Women who have integrated these 7 transformations become what I can only describe as complete, not because they don't have flaws or struggles, but because they've learned to include all of themselves in their concept of self. They've stopped rejecting pieces of their humanity and instead learned to weave them into a coherent, beautiful whole. That wholeness has a magnetic quality that cannot be faked or manufactured. It attracts people because everyone recognizes it as something they want for themselves. It's not about being perfect, it's about being real. It's not about having all the answers, it's about being comfortable with questions. It's not about never failing, it's about failing gracefully and learning from it. Jung spent his life studying what makes some people truly fulfilled while others remain stuck in cycles of suffering. His conclusion was that fulfillment doesn't come from avoiding our humanity, but from embracing it fully. Not from becoming someone else, but from becoming completely ourselves. These 7 transformations are the path to that becoming. They're not quick fixes or life hacks. They're invitations to a deeper relationship with yourself, with others, with life itself. When a woman completes this journey, when she's no longer driven by the need for external validation, when she's comfortable in her own skin, when she creates instead of reacts, when she trusts her own wisdom, when she honors her uniqueness, when she flows with life instead of fighting it, when she operates from love instead of fear, she becomes irresistible. Not because she tries to be. Because she has become completely herself, and nothing is more attractive than an authentic person living their truth. That's the secret Jung understood. We don't become attractive by becoming someone else. We become attractive by becoming completely ourselves. That's why these women don't need dating tactics or secrets to attract men. They don't need to learn how to play hard to get or create mystery because their authenticity naturally creates magnetism. They don't need to pretend to be someone else because who they are is already attractive enough. I remember an evening sitting with a group of female friends, everyone complaining about how difficult dating was. Men these days don't know what they want, one said. They just want young, beautiful girls, another added. I've tried every dating app, no one serious. In the middle of that, Sarah, the friend I mentioned at the beginning, said, you know, I think the problem isn't that men don't know what they want. The problem is we don't know who we are. The room went silent. I mean, Sarah continued, how can we attract the right person if we're pretending to be someone else? How can they love us if we don't show them who we really are? That's the heart of the matter. In a world of social media and dating apps, we've gotten used to curating ourselves, only showing the best angles, the perfect moments, the most polished thoughts. In the process, we've lost connection with who we really are. Real attraction doesn't come from perfection. It comes from authenticity. From vulnerability. From the courage to be yourself in a world that's constantly trying to make you someone else. Jung understood this when he wrote about individuation as not just a personal process but a gift to the world. When you become truly yourself, you inspire others to become truly themselves too. You create permission for authenticity, for vulnerability, for real connection. That's why women who have completed these transformations aren't just romantically attractive. They attract deep friendships, career opportunities, and meaningful connections in every area of life. Because everyone, not just men, craves authenticity in a world full of pretense. This process isn't easy or quick. Each transformation requires courage to face parts of yourself you've spent years hiding or denying. It requires patience with yourself as you stumble and fall back into old patterns. It requires faith that becoming yourself is worthwhile, even when the path isn't always clear. I think about the women I admire most, mentors, friends, even strangers I've met briefly but who left lasting impressions. They all have one thing in common: they're comfortable in their own skin. They're not trying to impress or prove anything. They simply exist. And in being completely themselves, they become irresistible. Not irresistible in a shallow way, though many of them are also physically attractive. But their magnetism goes deeper. It speaks to something fundamental in the human experience, the longing to be known and accepted for who we really are. When a woman embodies these 7 transformations, she becomes a safe harbor for others' authenticity. People feel they can be themselves around her without judgment. They feel seen, heard, valued. That creates connection that goes far beyond surface attraction. Jung believed the greatest gift we can give the world is our fully realized self. Not our perfect self, but our integrated self. The self that embraces contradictions, acknowledges flaws, owns the shadow, and still chooses to love and be loved. That's exactly the woman everyone wants, not because she gives them everything they think they want, but because she reminds them of who they could become. She reflects back their own potential for wholeness, for authenticity, for love. Most importantly, she shows that it's possible. That you can survive being truly seen. That you can thrive being completely honest. That you can be loved, deeply, truly loved, exactly as you are. That's revolutionary in a world that tells us we must change to be accepted. That's radical in a culture that profits from our insecurities. That's the ultimate attraction, a person comfortable enough in their own skin to allow others to be comfortable in theirs. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." It's not a final destination but an ongoing process. You never arrive at being completely yourself because you're always growing, always changing, always discovering new depths. But each step toward authenticity makes you more magnetic, more compelling, more genuinely attractive. Because ultimately, people don't love perfect people. They love real people, those brave enough to show their scars along with their strength, their questions along with their answers, their struggles along with their victories. When you become that person, when you complete these 7 internal transformations and integrate them into daily life, you don't just become the woman everyone wants. You become the woman you want to be. Perhaps that's the greatest transformation of all. Because ultimately, the most important relationship you'll ever have is with yourself. When that relationship is built on love, acceptance, and authentic understanding instead of criticism, fear, and pretense, everything else naturally follows. You attract what you are, not what you want. So become the woman you want to meet. Become the friend you want to have. Become the partner you want to love. Become completely, wholly, unapologetically yourself. That's Jung's ultimate wisdom, and perhaps life's greatest truth: there's no one you'd rather